Super Rugby Week 8 is done and dusted. Unfortunately, our South African teams didn't do very well. Our editor, Garen, and chief writer, Rob, are joining me in studio to recap the weekend and talk about if their predictions were correct. Thank you for joining me.
Morning, Jen. How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
How are you guys doing after that weekend?
Surviving.
Not much better than that. It was a pretty awful weekend. You know, it's the round 8 now. We're halfway through the tournament, Rob.
And it's not been a very good half.
No, the first half was pretty forgettable from a South African point of view, and it was certainly awful in week 8. You know, last week I predicted 1 victory out of the 4 matches. We didn't even do that well. We actually got 1 draw and 3 defeats. But we'll go through each match individually, starting off with the Bulls on their first game on tour. They were up against the Hurricanes team. And unfortunately for the Bulls, they got their tour off to a losing start. They did pick up a bonus point, so they went down 25-20, but they picked up a lot of injuries. They already got 2 guys back on the flight back home after 1 game. Question marks over Jacques-Louis Potgieter. He might still be ruled out. So they lost 2 loose forwards, so things not looking great for them. The injuries came fairly early on in the match, so that didn't really help them at all. They were always behind. They struggled to keep up. Potgieter, to his credit, he kept them in the game, I think, for 51 minutes in the end. Eventually he limped off, and then things sort of went downhill from there. So bad start for their tour, but it's been a South African trend, unfortunately, overseas. That's 9 games in a row now that we've lost overseas, yet to win. So not looking good from a South African point of view.
I keep saying you can only go up from the bottom, but it just seems like we're just staying there at the bottom.
It's not happening yet, Jen. It's perhaps it'll. The Bulls may still catch fire. I didn't think they looked too bad against the Hurricanes. What happened was they were, should we say, they were caught in a hurricane early on in the game because the Canes really threw the kitchen sink at them in the first 20 minutes. I think the Bulls perhaps a little bit surprised by the physicality and the forward commitment, Garen, of the Hurricanes, who normally don't have a particularly strong pack. And they really took it to the Bulls. The Bulls were forced into something like 50 tackles in the first 14 minutes. So they were very, very quickly out of gas and scrambling for a long part of the first half. And I thought it looked a little bit bleak for them at half time, quite frankly. But the one good thing, the one positive really from a Bulls point of view is that they did produce a little bit of a second wind after the break, came back quite strong, and of course almost nicked the game. When Handré Pollard went over for a very good sort of solo try, they took the lead with a few minutes left, and it looked as though they might actually pinch the game. Probably wouldn't have deserved to, but they did enough to show that they can still perhaps turn this tour around, and that the 1 defeat with, as Garen said, a losing bonus point, perhaps not the worst outcome in the world.
All right, in game 2, Garen?
Well, game 2 was our best result, if you're talking about it that way. That was the Cheetahs up against the defending champion Chiefs. And that ended unbelievably in a 43-all draw. It's the Chiefs' second draw in South Africa. I don't think that's ever happened anywhere before. So, again, a strange game in that the Cheetahs got off to a fantastic start. They led 34-10 at halftime. You know, you thought there was no way back for the Chiefs. But the Cheetahs were the team at the end that were really like begging for the final whistle. They were out on their feet, literally walking in the last couple of minutes of the game. The Chiefs, they scored the try equalising, if you like, score right in injury time at the end. Tim Nana-Williams going over under the poles to give them 3 points for the draw and the 5 points, the bonus point for the scoring the 4 tries. So, you know, the Cheetahs hadn't played the week before. They had a bye. Maybe that got caught up with them in the end, that the fact that they hadn't had any game time in the 7 days previously. So, strange result. You know, we thought that the Chiefs would easily win that game. They're the team that loves to score tries. They did score 6 tries in the end. The Cheetahs' defense, again, a little bit porous. But strange results. I don't know who. You know, I don't think we called it, so I'm not too sure who would be happier of the 2 teams, Rob.
Yeah, it was, you'll never get this again, Jen, where the Chiefs come to South Africa and get 2 high-scoring draws, 34-all against the Bulls and then 43-all against the Cheetahs. You know, if we were talking about cricket, you might suggest there was some sort of manipulation going on. It was a very strange outcome. What it did mean, though, was that they ended up getting 3 points from each match. So a total of 6 out of 10, which for a New Zealand team coming on tour to South Africa, most teams, Garen, would probably bank that, wouldn't they? Yeah. So 6 out of 10 was a good return. I think the Sharks would have been a little bit upset that the Cheetahs couldn't hold on because they did end up, eventually the Chiefs getting 3 points, which was not a bad haul and kept them within sight of the Sharks but perhaps not a train smash. And that was the only result that I got wrong of the South Africans. I took a lot of stick before the weekend,
Yeah, you did.
suggesting that all the South African teams would not win. So I was correct on that score. The only thing I didn't, of course, budget for was the draw, and that was the game that sort of spoiled things. But yes, it was a bit of a worry that no South African wins in 4 starts.
Okay, so unfortunately that was the best news we're going to get in this entire show.
Yeah.
So let's move on to game 3.
Well, the third game was the Lions at home against the Crusaders. Again, a strange match. The first half was only 6-0 to the Crusaders. A very stop-start, not a fantastic game to watch. But I think key for the Lions was the fact that they didn't have this big lead that they've had in previous matches. They tend to have let these leads slip going later on in the match. But the Crusaders just progressively got stronger and stronger in the second half, like the New Zealand teams have done in South Africa, and they ran away fairly comfortable victors in the end. They're still not a shadow of the team of the past. They're 7-time champions. They don't look anything like that. They're missing a lot of key players.
Yeah.
But they're getting better and better, and they're typically slow starters in this tournament. I still think come the business end of the tournament, they could well be there, could even sneak into the playoffs. And then when you bring back Dan Carter, Richie McCaw, Kieran Reid, they could still be a factor in these one-off playoff games, but that's still some time ahead. The Lions team, they weren't fantastic. The coach is having a bit of a go at the teams for their attitude.
Yeah.
And they've got some tough games coming up. I still think, like I've said every week, they're going to lose more games than they win this season. They'll probably slip down the table. They're pretty elevated at the moment, just outside the playoff positions. So I don't see things getting any better for the Lions. They're going to pick up key injuries. Marnus Boshoff, who pretty much kept them in every game to date, he was fairly quiet. I think he had his quietest game. He didn't kick nearly as well as he's done in the past. So things not looking good long term for the Lions. But to be fair, we didn't really predict anything fantastic from them. They sort of outplayed themselves in the first opening rounds of the tournament.
Yeah, I thought my view going was not to perhaps be too harsh on the Lions. I think they almost sort of punched at their weight in this game. I think what we've seen in the weeks preceding that perhaps was that them punching above their weight by surprising a lot of people, and maybe that surprise element has just sort of been doused a little bit because opposition teams have been able to now appreciate what the Lions are all about, whether they're playing them at home or away. They're just better able to gauge them. Let's not forget they missed last season in Super Rugby, so you couldn't use last season as any yardstick. So it was difficult to prepare for matches against the Lions. Now, teams have seen more and more of them and know where their strengths and weaknesses lie. And I didn't think they actually put up too bad a fight for quite a long period of that game. Yes, they always looked as though they were going to lose it. It always looked as though the Crusaders would have that little bit extra in the tank, but certain sort of gutsy elements. I thought Warren Whiteley led by example. That one tremendous tackle to stop a try was a highlight for me. He really showed a sort of a lead from the front sort of desire. And they didn't scrum too badly, the Lions. They were competitive against the Crusaders pack for good parts of the game before it did fall apart a little bit at the end. So still a few things to grab onto, but it's beginning to look as though the Lions perhaps are going to have a little bit of a downward curve now.
All right, and Garen, take us to the last game here.
The fourth game, that was the Stormers against the Waratahs. This is actually the game that I thought the Stormers might just sneak. They've come back from a tour from hell, if you like. They've lost all 4 games, and the Waratahs were beaten fairly convincingly by the Sharks the week before. But the Waratahs got up for the game. The Stormers were fairly average, or worse than I certainly thought. The Waratahs were still missing Israel Folau, the leading try scorer in the tournament, so they didn't have him as an attacking weapon. But the Waratahs, I thought, Rob, were always in control of the game. The Stormers went up 3-0, but then after that, it was pretty much all the Waratahs. It wasn't a fantastic game at all. There was one try piece and fairly scrappy try from the Waratahs in particularly. But the kickers kept them in the game. The Newlands fans turned up, not as in their numbers as we've become accustomed to. I think the 25,000, which is a far cry from the tournament leading crowds that the Stormers normally can bank on. So things not looking good for them. They've got a bye this week, so they've got no momentum to pick up. But they've got a lot of injuries. A lot's been talked about that in the media of late. So I'm not sure who they're getting back in the next couple of weeks, but they've got some tough games coming up, and now that's their first defeat at home. So not looking good. Bottom of the South African Conference, bottom of the overall log. So dire times down in Cape Town, unfortunately.
Rob?
Yes, I wish I had sort of brighter news, but again, as Garen said, it did look as though the Stormers were always going to lose that game, Jen. They had a good patch in the first half where they got onto the front foot a little bit, and then there was that really good try by Juan de Jong, which was a little bit of it was almost a bit of sort of manna from heaven, because it was we've been waiting for a properly craftily constructed Stormers try, which let's face it, they don't come often. They usually come from rolling mauls if they come at all, and they actually constructed a really good try. But then they went back into their old sort of defensive habit. They've just got this inclination to, when they're in slightest semblance of trouble, to kick the ball away. They've got possession and they kick it away. And I mean, I read a few tweets from some fairly disbelieving former Western Province and Stormers players saying, how can they be kicking the ball away when they're 11 points down with a few minutes left? Then you think that there is just something culturally wrong with the team's thinking. And that's something that they're going to have to address with Gert Smal very urgently, I think.
Okay, so now we usually talk about the most valuable players, but I'm not going to ask about that because I would like to keep them all South African. But I know we have some great photo galleries. So, Garen, how can people share their photos if any of them were at the games this past
If you were at any of the matches this weekend, please send through your pictures to mysport@sport24.co.za. We'll put them up in our gallery that we currently do have. And if you want to check out how you did against our predictions, please join the Super Brew pool. We'd love to have you.